A good police dog does not bark because it is afraid. It barks because it has already found the question everyone else has missed. The Grand Maple Convention Center in downtown Ottawa glowed beneath warm crystal chandeliers, their golden reflections flowing across polished marble floors like quiet rivers of light. Outside, a cool autumn breeze stirred crimson maple leaves still damp from a brief afternoon shower, carrying the clean scent of cedar and fresh earth through the Capitol. Inside, elegance softened every corner of the evening. Gentle laughter blended with the music of a live string quartet, while crystal glasses caught the warm light above beautifully arranged tables. Tonight was a celebration of hope. One of Canada's most respected surgeons, Dr. Alastair Vane, was about to receive a prestigious award recognizing decades of service and remarkable medical achievement. Standing quietly beside the eastern entrance, Officer Callum Whitaker adjusted the collar of his dark navy police jacket embroidered with the words "Police Officer" before scanning the room with calm blue eyes. At 38 years old, Callum carried the steady confidence that only years of public service could build. His broad shoulders remained relaxed, his posture disciplined, and every movement reflected quiet professionalism rather than authority. Beside him stood Bramble, a 6-year-old German shepherd whose sable coat shimmered beneath the ballroom lights. His amber eyes rarely rested for long. Every unfamiliar sound, every shifting scent, every subtle movement quietly entered his awareness. For nearly 7 years, Bramble had worked beside Callum through missing person searches, disaster response, narcotics investigations, and countless public events. Veteran officers often joked that Bramble possessed better instincts than most detectives. Callum never laughed at that joke. He had seen those instincts save lives too many times. Across the ballroom, applause rose as Dr. Alastair Vane stepped gracefully onto the stage. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a black tuxedo, he greeted hospital executives, city officials, and grateful families with a warmth that had made him beloved throughout the country. Camera flashes illuminated his gentle smile, while the master of ceremonies described him as a man who had restored hope where others had seen only despair. Guests rose together in a standing ovation that echoed beneath the crystal ceiling. Callum allowed himself a small smile. It appeared destined to become another peaceful assignment. Then Bramble stopped moving. His ears lifted. His breathing slowed. His nose tested the air once. Then again. Every sound inside the ballroom seemed to disappear for him. The applause no longer mattered. The music faded into silence. There was only one scent demanding his complete attention. Without warning, Bramble stepped forward until the leash became taut. A deep, restrained growl rolled quietly through his chest. Callum immediately rested a calming hand against the dog's neck. "Easy, partner," he whispered, convinced the crowded ballroom had simply overwhelmed his senses for a moment. Bramble ignored the reassurance. His eyes never settled on Dr. Vane's face. Instead, they lowered toward the polished marble floor beneath the surgeon's shoes. His nose continued working with slow, deliberate precision, as though something invisible clung there. "Come on," Callum murmured gently, giving the leash a light pull. Not tonight. For the first time in years, he silently hoped his partner was mistaken. Then Bramble released a single sharp bark that shattered the elegant silence. Conversations stopped instantly. Crystal glasses froze halfway towards smiling faces. The musicians lowered their bows. Hundreds of startled eyes turned toward the German shepherd. Dr. Vane remained perfectly composed, but Bramble did not look at the celebrated surgeon. He stared only at the floor beneath him, refusing to break his focus for even a second. In that brief moment, Callum felt something unfamiliar settle into his thoughts. It was not suspicion, not yet. It was the uneasy realization that if Bramble was wrong tonight, it would be the first time in nearly 7 years. Silence settled across the ballroom with surprising weight. Even the string quartet stopped in the middle of a note, leaving only the faint hum of the ventilation system drifting through the elegant hall. Dr. Alistair Vane lowered the crystal award slightly before turning toward Bramble with an expression that seemed more curious than offended. Within seconds, his familiar, gentle smile returned. "A magnificent working dog," he said warmly. "Perhaps all the excitement has simply given him too much to process." Nervous laughter spread through the audience. Several guests smiled with visible relief, grateful that the celebrated surgeon appeared completely unbothered by the interruption. Callum felt a quiet wave of embarrassment settle over him. He crouched beside Bramble and rested one steady hand against the German shepherd's shoulder. "Stand down," he said softly. Bramble obeyed the command immediately, lowering his body without resistance. Yet his amber eyes never left the polished marble floor beneath Dr. Vane's shoes. His nose continued drawing slow, measured breaths, searching for something no human in the room could detect. Callum had witnessed that exact expression dozens of times during active investigations. Bramble never looked like that when he was confused. He looked like that when he was certain. The thought unsettled him. For nearly 7 years, his partner had never alerted without a reason. But this was not a warehouse, a disaster site, or a narcotics search. This was one of the most respected surgeons in the country, surrounded by grateful families, hospital executives, elected officials, and colleagues who admired him without hesitation. There had to be another explanation. The master of ceremonies recovered gracefully, inviting another round of applause that slowly encouraged the evening to continue. Musicians resumed playing. Waiters carrying silver trays moved carefully between tables decorated with fresh maple branches and white roses. Conversation gradually returned, although quieter than before. Only Bramble remained unchanged. Throughout the remaining speeches, he never barked again. He simply watched. Occasionally his nose lifted into the air before settling once more toward the floor beneath Dr. Vane whenever the surgeon moved across the stage. Callum caught himself following the same spot with his own eyes. Nothing appeared unusual. The marble reflected warm chandelier light without revealing a single clue. More than once he quietly reminded himself that not every unanswered question became a criminal investigation. Even so, another thought refused to disappear. What if Bramble was not reacting to the man at all? What if he was reacting to something the man had unknowingly carried into the room? The possibility lingered in the back of his mind long after he tried to dismiss it. Nearly 40 minutes later, the ceremony concluded. Guests gathered around Dr. Vane for photographs and congratulations while reporters prepared brief interviews beneath bright television lights. The surgeon greeted everyone with effortless kindness, shaking hands with former patients and thanking donors for supporting medical research. Callum observed from his assigned position, waiting for the evening to end without further incident. Then Dr. Vane began walking toward the private exit reserved for distinguished guests. Bramble's ears rose instantly. He stood without being asked. His breathing deepened. Quietly, almost respectfully, he stepped forward until the leash became tight once again. There was no barking this time, no growling, only calm determination. Callum looked down at his partner. "You are still telling me the same story, are you not?" he whispered. Bramble briefly met his eyes before turning back toward the departing surgeon. That silent look carried the same certainty as the bark that had frozen the ballroom only minutes earlier. For the first time that evening, Callum stopped wondering whether Bramble had made a mistake. Instead, he found himself asking a far more difficult question. What had his partner noticed that every person in that room, including him, had completely overlooked ... The dark sport utility vehicle carrying Dr. Alistair Vane disappeared gradually into Ottawa's evening traffic until its rear lights blended with countless reflections shimmering across rain-darkened streets. Callum remained standing beside the patrol vehicle for several quiet seconds, watching the traffic flow naturally through the city. The assignment was over. By every official standard, his responsibility had ended the moment the ceremony concluded without incident. He could return to headquarters, complete a routine security report, and leave the strange interruption behind like everyone else probably would. Yet one sharp bark continued echoing inside his thoughts. He looked down at Bramble. The German shepherd stood perfectly still beside him, neither restless nor excited. His amber eyes remained fixed in the direction the surgeon's vehicle had disappeared. There was no uncertainty in his posture, only patient confidence. Callum slowly unclipped the radio from his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Officer Whitaker. Ceremony concluded without incident. I will remain on routine patrol in the downtown sector for a while longer." "Copy that, Officer Whitaker," the dispatcher replied. "Drive safely." Callum thanked the dispatcher before resting one hand gently against Bramble's neck. "All right, partner," he said quietly. "One last look. If there is nothing there, we go home." Bramble responded by calmly stepping toward the patrol vehicle without hesitation, as though he had understood every word. The cruiser rolled through Ottawa beneath rows of glowing streetlights, while a cool autumn breeze carried the scent of damp pavement and fallen maple leaves through slightly open windows. Traffic remained light as the city settled into the peaceful rhythm of the evening. Bramble sat upright in the rear compartment, his ears shifting only occasionally. Every few intersections, his nose lifted into the air, quietly sampling scents drifting through the cool Canadian night. Nearly 25 kilometers later, they entered the quiet streets of Rockcliffe Park. Large stone homes rested behind elegant wrought iron gates, surrounded by towering cedar hedges and carefully maintained gardens. The atmosphere changed immediately. City noise faded. The streets became almost silent. Then Bramble stood. A soft whine escaped him for the first time that evening. Ahead, illuminated by discreet landscape lighting, stood the entrance to the Vane estate. The surgeon's dark sport utility vehicle rested beneath the covered driveway, exactly where Bramble expected it to be. The estate reflected extraordinary success without appearing extravagant. Modern architecture blended naturally with limestone walls, expansive glass windows, and mature maple trees glowing beneath warm exterior lights. Nothing looked suspicious. Everything suggested discipline, refinement, and impeccable taste. Callum parked legally along the public roadway, several meters away. "We are not investigating," he reminded himself quietly as much as he reminded Bramble. "We are simply observing." Bramble stepped down from the patrol vehicle and immediately ignored the front entrance. Instead, he followed the outer edge of the property where ornamental cedar trees partially concealed the western side of the residence. His pace remained slow, deliberate, almost methodical. Every few meters he paused, inhaled deeply, then continued along the same invisible trail. Callum had watched highly trained police dogs work hundreds of scenes throughout his career. This was not excitement. This was scent discrimination. Eventually, Bramble stopped beside a decorative stone retaining wall near a discreet basement ventilation outlet hidden within the landscaping. He inhaled once, then again. This time, instead of moving forward, he looked directly back at Callum. It was exactly the same look, the same quiet certainty that had preceded the single bark inside the ballroom. A light breeze shifted across the property. Even Callum caught a faint odor drifting through the vent. Antiseptic. medical cleaning solution, pharmaceutical compounds commonly found inside hospitals. That alone explained very little. Dr. Vane was a surgeon. Such sense naturally followed his profession. But beneath them lingered something far more difficult to explain. Layer upon layer of different human scents overlapped within the confined airflow, suggesting prolonged occupancy by numerous unrelated individuals. Callum frowned. The uneasy question that first appeared after Bramble's bark returned with greater weight than before. Perhaps his partner had never been reacting to Dr. Vane himself. Perhaps he had been reacting to where those scents had come from. For the first time that night, Callum stopped trying to prove Bramble wrong. He quietly accepted something much more unsettling. Whatever his partner had discovered, it was still here. Callum remained beside the stone wall for nearly a minute, allowing the cool autumn air to quiet the questions forming inside his mind. Bramble stayed motionless near the ventilation outlet, his nose occasionally lifting toward the faint current of air escaping from below the estate. It was the same calm certainty Callum had seen only hours earlier beneath the bright lights of the ballroom. The bark had ended. The message had not. Professional instinct reminded him of an important rule. Suspicion was never evidence. A highly trained police dog could identify an unusual scent, but scent alone did not justify searching private property. Callum clipped Bramble's leash a little shorter before walking toward the front entrance along a stone pathway bordered by neatly trimmed cedar hedges. Warm light glowed through tall windows, revealing a peaceful home that looked exactly as one might expect from a respected physician. Before he reached the front door, it opened quietly. Dr. Alistair Vane stood there dressed in a charcoal sweater and pressed trousers, his expression calm, courteous, and impossible to read. "Officer Whitaker," he said with a polite smile. "I thought I recognized your patrol vehicle." Callum returned the greeting. "Good evening, Doctor. I apologize for arriving unannounced. My partner displayed an unusual reaction during the ceremony, and I wanted to ensure everything was all right." Dr. Vane listened without interrupting. His eyes briefly settled on Bramble before returning to Callum. "I understand your concern," he replied. "Working dogs often notice details the rest of us overlook." His answer surprised Callum. There was neither irritation nor defensiveness in his voice, only measured composure. "Would you mind answering a few questions?" Callum asked. "Of course," the surgeon replied. "Here is perfectly fine." He remained standing in the open doorway rather than inviting the officer inside. It was a small detail, yet Callum noticed it. Immediately, the conversation continued politely on the front steps. Callum explained that Bramble had repeatedly focused on a particular scent connected to the property. Dr. Vane nodded thoughtfully. "That would not surprise me," he said. "After decades in surgery, medical disinfectants, laboratory chemicals, and pharmaceutical compounds tend to accompany almost everything I own. I also maintain a licensed private medical research facility connected to my residence. Research equipment has a way of carrying familiar hospital scents." The explanation sounded entirely reasonable. In fact, it answered nearly every practical question Callum had prepared. Nothing about the surgeon's tone suggested deception. If anything, he appeared patient with an officer simply doing his job. Yet while the conversation continued, Bramble quietly stepped away from the entrance. Without pulling on the leash, he guided Callum's attention toward a large picture window overlooking another room inside the home. Beyond the glass, warm lamplight revealed an elegant private library lined with towering walnut bookshelves and antique medical texts. Bramble did not bark. He simply stood facing the room, his ears forward, his breathing slow, his eyes fixed beyond the glass, as though the scent he had followed from the ballroom had become stronger. Callum noticed the change immediately. Dr. Vane followed the dog's gaze. That is my library, he explained calmly. I spend most evenings there reviewing research. Another perfectly reasonable answer. Another explanation that should have settled the matter. Instead, Callum felt the quiet unease growing stronger. It was no longer the dog's behavior troubling him. It was the remarkable consistency of it. The same scent, the same focus, the same unwavering certainty. 3 different locations. One identical response. Callum offered a respectful nod. Thank you for your time, Doctor. I appreciate your cooperation. Dr. Vane inclined his head politely. If your department requires documentation regarding my research license, my solicitor will gladly provide it through the appropriate channels. There was no invitation to enter the residence. No refusal either. Only a calm reminder that professional boundaries existed for everyone. As Callum turned to leave, Bramble remained facing the library window for several silent seconds before finally following his partner. Neither of them looked back, but Callum understood something had changed. He had arrived hoping to prove that one unexpected bark had been a mistake. Instead, he was leaving with a question that had become impossible to ignore, and one that could only be answered through the proper legal process. Callum drove away from the estate without speaking. The quiet streets of Rockcliffe Park stretched ahead beneath rows of maple trees whose golden leaves drifted slowly across the pavement. Bramble lay quietly in the rear compartment of the patrol vehicle. Yet every few minutes he lifted his head toward the direction they had just left. The bark inside the ballroom echoed once more in Callum's memory. It had not been an emotional reaction. It had been a warning. Back at headquarters, Callum completed a detailed occurrence report before requesting an immediate meeting with Sergeant Isabelle Fournier. Rather than describing feelings or assumptions, he documented only observable facts. A highly trained police K-9 with 7 years of flawless operational performance had reacted consistently to the same unidentified scent in 3 separate locations. Beneath Dr. Alastair Vane during the awards ceremony, near a basement ventilation outlet outside the residence, and finally toward the library visible through the front window. Sergeant Fournier read the report twice before placing it carefully on her desk. You are not asking for a search because you dislike the man, she said calmly. You are asking because your evidence suggests there may be an undisclosed area associated with unusual scent activity. Callum nodded. That is correct. I cannot explain what Bramble detected, but I cannot explain why he detected it 3 separate times either. The sergeant remained silent for several moments before making her decision. We will do this properly. Within the hour, a small investigative team reviewed the report together with a Crown prosecutor. Additional background checks revealed that Dr. Vane did indeed possess approvals connected to private medical research. However, several portions of the property's lower level were not clearly described within publicly available building documentation. That information alone proved nothing. Yet combined with the repeated police K-9 alerts, it justified seeking judicial authorization for a limited search relating to potential public safety concerns. Shortly before midnight, the authorization was granted. The following morning, under clear autumn skies, 2 marked police vehicles and an unmarked investigative unit entered the circular driveway of the Vane estate. Bramble remained calm beside Callum, while Sergeant Fournier approached the front entrance carrying the signed judicial warrant. Dr. Alastair Vane opened the door after the first knock. His expression remained composed as Sergeant Fournier identified herself and presented the court-authorized document. He read every page carefully before looking back at the officers. No anger crossed his face. No panic appeared in his eyes. Understand, he said quietly. Please conduct your duties. He stepped aside without another word. The officers entered respectfully, documenting every room with body-worn cameras while remaining strictly within the scope authorized by the warrant. Nothing inside suggested disorder. Walnut floors reflected the morning sunlight. Family photographs remained neatly arranged. Medical awards lined the walls exactly as they had the previous evening. Every detail reinforced the public image of a disciplined and compassionate physician. Bramble ignored almost everything. Without pulling on the leash, he walked directly toward the library with the same measured confidence Callum had witnessed since the first bark. Several forensic officers carefully photographed the room before anyone touched a single object. Measurements were taken. Floor surfaces were documented. Every observation was recorded according to procedure. Bramble stopped in the center of the library exactly where he had focused the previous night. He lowered his nose to the polished hardwood floor and inhaled slowly. Then he tapped the same board once with his paw. No barking, no excitement, just the same calm certainty. A forensic specialist examined the flooring and quietly pointed toward several nearly invisible seams running beneath the finish. Another investigator noticed that the grain pattern changed subtly across one section of the room. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, yet enough to suggest that part of the floor had been reconstructed with exceptional precision. Bramble then turned toward the towering walnut bookshelf overlooking the fireplace. He walked directly to its center, pressed his shoulder lightly against the wood, and stood perfectly still. Callum looked at Sergeant Fournier. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she studied the room in complete silence before giving one simple instruction. Document everything. We proceed one step at a time. In that moment, Callum realized the investigation had reached the place Bramble had been trying to show them from the very beginning. The bark had only opened the door. The evidence would have to reveal the rest. The library remained almost perfectly silent as forensic specialists continued documenting every detail before a single object was moved. High-resolution photographs captured the floorboards from multiple angles, while laser measurements recorded the dimensions of the room. Fingerprint technicians examined polished surfaces beneath soft forensic lighting, careful not to disturb anything unnecessarily. Bramble never lost interest in the same narrow section of the library. He stood quietly beside the walnut bookshelf, his ears forward and his breathing calm, as though patiently waiting for everyone else to catch up. Sergeant Isabelle Fournier watched him for several moments before turning toward the forensic team. "Proceed exactly as documented," she said. "Nothing moves until every step is recorded." A structural specialist knelt beside the bookshelf and directed a compact inspection light along its base. Almost immediately, a faint metallic reflection appeared beneath the decorative trim. He leaned closer, gently brushing away a thin layer of dust that had settled inside the recessed channel. "There's a concealed guide rail," he said quietly. "This bookshelf was designed to move. No one touched it yet. Every discovery was photographed, measured, and entered into the evidence log before the examination continued." A forensic engineer carefully inspected the surrounding woodwork and noticed light where around the base of an antique brass reading lamp positioned on a side table beside the shelves. Unlike every other decorative object in the room, the lamp showed subtle polishing marks concentrated around its base rather than its handle. "This may be part of the mechanism," she observed. Sergeant Fournier nodded. "Document it first." Minutes later, after every required photograph had been completed, the engineer carefully rotated the brass lamp less than a quarter turn. A soft mechanical click echoed somewhere behind the wall. Several officers instinctively looked toward the bookshelf. Slowly, almost silently, the enormous walnut structure began sliding sideways along the concealed rail Bramble had identified. Cool, filtered air drifted upward from the darkness beyond. Automatic lighting gradually illuminated a wide staircase descending beneath the residence. No one spoke. Callum glanced toward Bramble. The German shepherd neither barked nor moved forward. He simply watched the opening with the same quiet certainty he had carried since the ballroom. It was the same message, the same scent, the same answer finally becoming visible. Sergeant Fournier addressed the team calmly. The hidden area has now been lawfully discovered under the authority of the warrant. Continue recording. Body-worn cameras remained active as officers descended the staircase, one careful step at a time. What appeared below surprised everyone. The lower level did not resemble an abandoned basement or a neglected storage area. Instead, it looked remarkably similar to a modern private medical clinic. Bright overhead lighting reflected from spotless floors. Examination rooms lined a central corridor behind frosted glass doors. Air filtration systems operated quietly overhead, while organized shelves held labeled medical supplies arranged with exceptional precision. The environment appeared orderly, professional, and meticulously maintained. Yet something immediately felt incomplete. Inspector David Mercer from the Provincial Medical Regulatory Unit slowly surveyed the corridor. "Where are the facility registration notices?" he asked. Licensed treatment areas in Canada were normally required to display specific regulatory information in clearly visible locations. None could be found. Bramble walked calmly down the corridor ahead of the officers, following the same scent that had first reached him beneath Dr. Vane's shoes. He stopped outside a closed treatment room and gently rested one paw against the door before looking back toward Callum. Callum opened it slowly. Inside, soft natural lighting illuminated a comfortable recovery suite rather than a prison. Medical equipment operated quietly beside a neatly made bed where a middle-aged woman rested peacefully beneath a blanket. She opened her eyes as the officers entered and smiled with gentle relief. "Has the doctor finished speaking at the ceremony?" she asked softly. "He told me he would return afterward." Callum introduced himself in a calm voice before asking for her name. "Meredith Vale," she answered without hesitation. "The doctor said I was making excellent progress and only needed a little more time before going home." Sergeant Fournier quietly checked secure provincial medical records using her encrypted tablet. Her expression changed almost immediately. According to official records, Meredith Vale had been discharged from all registered inpatient care nearly 4 months earlier. Yet she spoke with complete confidence, believing she had never left treatment. Callum looked once toward Bramble. At last, he understood why one quiet bark had refused to let them walk away. The recovery suite remained peaceful as registered paramedics completed their initial assessments. Meredith Vale showed no signs of immediate medical distress, yet her understanding of time appeared strangely fragmented. She spoke warmly about Dr. Alistair Vane, convinced he had personally supervised every stage of her recovery only hours before. When Sergeant Isabelle Fournier gently asked when she had last spoken with a family member, Meredith hesitated. She smiled uncertainly before answering. "The doctor said he had been keeping everyone informed so I could focus on getting stronger." She seemed completely reassured by that explanation. Callum exchanged a quiet glance with the sergeant. Neither of them responded immediately. Bramble had already continued farther down the corridor. Without hesitation, he stopped outside another treatment room and calmly rested one paw against the closed door. The same signal, the same certainty. Callum opened the room slowly. Inside, another patient rested comfortably beneath soft lighting. A silver-haired man looked toward the officers with mild surprise rather than fear. A paperback novel lay open beside him, and a half-finished cup of tea rested on the bedside table. The surroundings felt more like a private recovery retreat than a place anyone would question. "Good afternoon," the man said politely. "Has Dr. Vane returned from the awards ceremony?" Callum introduced himself before asking the man's name. "Jonah Kessler," came a calm reply. The doctor told me another few weeks of observation would give me the best chance of making a full recovery before returning home. Once again, Sergeant Fournier quietly reviewed secure provincial medical records. Jonah Kessler had officially completed his registered treatment nearly 5 months earlier. There was no authorization placing him in any licensed inpatient facility after that date. Yet, Jonah believed his care had continued without interruption. Independent medical personnel carefully evaluated both patients. Their physical conditions appeared generally stable. Neither displayed evidence of recent physical harm. What concerned the clinicians instead was the remarkable similarity in their accounts. Both believed important personal matters had been handled on their behalf while they concentrated on recovery. Both trusted that communications with relatives had been managed for them. Both struggled to recall precise dates from the previous several months. Those consistent patterns prompted investigators to widen their examination beyond the treatment rooms. While healthcare professionals continued caring for the patients, forensic officers proceeded through the remainder of the lower level according to established evidence protocols. Bramble walked quietly ahead until he stopped inside a consultation office. Rather than focusing on the desks or medical equipment, he approached a built-in steel filing cabinet recessed into the wall behind a row of reference books. He gently pressed his nose against one drawer before sitting calmly beside it. Callum recognized the behavior immediately. Bramble was no longer searching for people. He had found something worth preserving. The cabinet was photographed, dusted for fingerprints, and examined before being opened under the authority of the search warrant. Inside, investigators discovered hundreds of meticulously organized patient files. At first glance, every document appeared professionally prepared. Treatment notes, laboratory results, correspondence, and consent forms had been arranged with extraordinary precision. Yet as financial crimes specialists began comparing the records with secure provincial databases, subtle inconsistencies emerged. Several patients listed in the files had officially completed treatment months earlier. Others appeared in the private archive, but could not be matched to active records associated with the facility. Investigators continued documenting every discovery without reaching conclusions prematurely. Bramble had not finished. He quietly crossed the consultation room and stopped beside an antique globe displayed near a walnut panel. His ears lifted slightly as he focused on one small section of the wall. A forensic examiner inspected the area and located a concealed access panel almost invisible within the wood grain. Following documentation and photography, the compartment was carefully opened. Inside rested a compact, fire-resistant safe secured behind reinforced steel. Rather than attempting to force it immediately, investigators documented its condition and arranged for a certified forensic locksmith to open it under controlled evidence procedures. When the heavy door finally swung open, neatly organized financial records, property transfer agreements, powers of attorney, encrypted storage devices, and archived digital media filled the shelves. No one spoke for several seconds. Sergeant Fournier quietly closed the safe again after its contents had been fully photographed. She looked toward Callum, then down at Bramble resting calmly beside the wall. "The investigation did not begin when we opened this safe," she said softly. "It began when one faithful partner refused to let us ignore a single bark." The investigation expanded steadily over the following days as every item recovered under the search warrant moved through the careful process required by Canadian law. Nothing was assumed. Every document was cataloged, every digital device was forensically imaged, and every financial record was independently verified before investigators drew a single conclusion. Inside the Ottawa Police Service Major Crime Unit, specialists from financial crimes, digital forensics, provincial medical regulators, and legal investigators worked together in quiet concentration. The hidden safe had contained hundreds of records, but it was the consistency between them that gradually revealed the larger picture. Encrypted storage devices were examined under judicial authorization, revealing archived correspondence, financial transactions, appointment schedules, and administrative records that could be compared with provincial databases. Independent forensic accountants traced property transfers, insurance changes, and powers of attorney through official registries. None of the individual documents appeared unusual when viewed alone. Together, however, they formed a remarkably consistent pattern. Several vulnerable patients suffering from serious medical conditions had remained almost completely dependent upon Dr. Alistair Vane during extended periods of recovery. Investigators concluded that many important legal and financial documents had been presented alongside routine medical paperwork at times when patients relied almost entirely upon the physician they trusted. The evidence suggested that confidence had gradually replaced careful scrutiny. No dramatic confrontation had been necessary. Trust itself had become the instrument through which control quietly shifted from patients to documents they believed were part of ordinary treatment. Meredith Vale and Jonah Kessler were transferred to an accredited hospital where independent physicians reviewed every aspect of their ongoing care. As familiar routines changed and outside communication gradually resumed, both patients began remembering small details that had once seemed perfectly ordinary. Meredith recalled being told that repeated telephone conversations with relatives would only increase stress during recovery. Jonah remembered signing several administrative forms after being assured they concerned routine treatment planning. Neither described threats or violence. Instead, both spoke about complete confidence in a physician whose professional reputation had never given them reason to question his guidance. Those independent accounts closely matched evidence already recovered during the investigation. Additional names soon emerged from the archived records. Welfare checks were conducted across Ontario and neighboring provinces in cooperation with local police services and healthcare authorities. Several individuals were located safely, believing they had voluntarily transferred financial authority while focusing entirely on medical recovery. Others have become increasingly isolated after allowing professional decisions to replace direct communication with family members. Each verified interview added another carefully documented piece to the investigation. Throughout the legal process, Dr. Alistair Vane exercised his right to legal counsel while investigators continued gathering evidence through established judicial procedures. Months of independent review followed. Medical ethics specialists, forensic accountants, handwriting experts, and digital analysts each prepared reports within their own fields of expertise. Piece by piece, separate findings supported one another without relying upon speculation. Outside the courthouse, journalists reported each new development as public attention grew across the country. Many people struggled to reconcile the admired surgeon celebrated at the gala with the evidence now presented through formal legal proceedings. Late one evening, after another long day reviewing statements and evidence, Callum briefly returned to the now secured estate with members of the investigative team to complete final documentation. The hidden bookshelf remained open, exposing the staircase that Bramble had unknowingly pointed toward from the very beginning. Dust drifted quietly through narrow beams of fading sunlight entering the library windows. Bramble stood calmly beside his partner, no longer searching, no longer alerting. His work was finished. Callum rested one hand against the German shepherd's neck and looked toward the silent staircase. He finally understood that the investigation had never truly begun inside the hidden clinic or with the financial records preserved inside the safe. It had begun with one patient partner who refused to abandon a single cent, and one officer who eventually chose to trust the quiet certainty behind the first bark. Many months later, The final judgment was delivered inside a quiet Ottawa courtroom, where every decision rested upon carefully examined evidence rather than emotion. After hearing testimony from independent medical experts, forensic accountants, digital specialists, investigators, and affected patients, the court concluded that numerous financial transfers and legal authorizations had been obtained through an abuse of professional trust. Orders were issued restoring property, insurance benefits, financial accounts, and legal rights wherever the law allowed. For Meredith Vale, the decision meant returning to the small stone cottage overlooking the river where the maple trees her late husband had planted still welcomed each new autumn. For Jonah Kessler, it meant unlocking the family woodworking shop that had remained closed for far too long. Other families slowly rebuilt lives interrupted not by violence, but by misplaced trust placed in the wrong hands. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered beneath a pale Canadian sky as official statements were released through proper channels. Public reaction spread quickly across the country. Many people struggled to accept that a physician once celebrated for extraordinary skill had also betrayed the confidence that patients had placed in him. Former colleagues spoke with sadness rather than anger. Patients whose lives had genuinely been improved through his surgical ability found themselves confronting a difficult truth. Exceptional talent and unquestioned integrity had never been the same thing. Callum Whitaker quietly left through a side entrance before the cameras noticed him. Public recognition had never been the reason he wore the uniform. As he walked toward his patrol vehicle, Bramble matched every step without needing a command. The German shepherd glanced briefly at his partner before looking ahead again, completely unaware that the investigation, which had changed so many lives, had begun because he refused to ignore one unfamiliar scent. Several weeks later, the Ottawa Police Service held a modest recognition ceremony attended by fellow officers, investigators, paramedics, forensic specialists, and representatives from provincial healthcare agencies who had participated in the case. There were no dramatic speeches and no elaborate celebration. The chief of police simply spoke about professionalism, patience, and the importance of trusting well-trained partners. When Bramble was called forward, he walked calmly beside Callum, wearing his ceremonial police K9 harness. A medal recognizing exceptional service was carefully attached to the harness, while quiet applause filled the room. Bramble accepted the attention with the same calm expression he carried on every ordinary patrol. He did not understand medals. He did not understand ceremonies. He understood only the familiar hand that gently rested against his neck. Callum smiled and quietly whispered, "Good work, partner." Those 3 words seemed to mean more than any public recognition ever could. After the ceremony ended, the medal was carefully placed inside a display case at headquarters while Bramble waited patiently beside the patrol vehicle, already prepared for another ordinary shift. Before long, they were driving through familiar Ottawa streets beneath rows of brilliant golden maples. Children walked home from school. Neighbors greeted one another across quiet sidewalks. The city moved peacefully through another ordinary afternoon, unaware of how close some lives had come to being lost in silence. As the patrol vehicle paused beside the Rideau Canal, Callum rested one hand on the steering wheel and looked toward Bramble. His thoughts drifted back to the ballroom, where crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble and one unexpected bark had interrupted a room filled with applause. At that moment, he had almost asked his partner to forget what he had sensed. If he had done so, Meredith would never have returned home. Jonah would never have reopened his family's workshop. Countless documents would have remained hidden behind polished wood and quiet smiles. People would have believed the truth began beneath a hidden staircase. Callum knew differently. It began with one faithful German shepherd who refused to walk away, and one police officer who finally chose to listen. Some investigations begin with evidence. Some begin with witnesses. And once in a very rare, while justice begins with a single bark that no one else understands until is far too important to ignore.